Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 293 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book is called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. So go and pick up that book today on Amazon. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, there are probably a handful of people out there that are just as passionate about hazing prevention as I am. And I think our next guest, he might have me beat. Our next guest is Dr. Ryan Mckee. He is a health and sexuality educator. He is a hazing and prevention specialist. He is a researcher, and he has 20 years of experience in higher education. Welcome to the show, Dr. Mckee.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I've been following you on social media, and as soon as I started reading your stuff, I'm like, I need to get to know Dr. Mckee a little bit better and just kind of figure out some of the work that you're into, because I'm passionate about all the same great stuff that you're passionate about, which is hazing prevention at the end of the day. So I appreciate what you do.
Right. Thank you.
Of course, of course. Now let's go back to your undergrad days. I think it's kind of interesting because you decided on Radford University for your undergraduate experience. So I'm curious, what made you choose Radford of all places?
Radford, number one, was close to home. It was about an hour and a half away from Bassett, Virginia, where I grew up. And I was really close friends with a couple of guys who went to community college instead of going to a four-year school. So I, didn't necessarily want to be too far away from them. And later on, several of those guys joined me at Radford. And also, it was a smaller school. So I was interested in trying to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, I guess, than going to, say, Virginia Tech, which is our neighboring school, which was huge by Radford standards.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I've certainly spent a lot of time on that campus, and I appreciate the students who go there. So it's just kind of cool to find more graduates of Radford who have that Greek affiliation and are out there, trying to make our industry better. So I certainly appreciate that. And of course, you did join a fraternity while you were there at Radford. But what's interesting about that whole experience is that ultimately you lied to yourself and other people about your fraternity experience for years concerning the hazing that you experienced while you were in the fraternity, and that you actually perpetuated the cycle when your time came as a brother. So I'm curious, why did you keep that whole experience to yourself?
Well, I think at first when I was going through it, I joined Sigma Chi my junior year. And when I was first going through it, like so many other fraternity men or sorority women, I didn't really realize what was happening was hazing. It was pretty mild, to be quite honest, in comparison to some of the other chapters on campus. And I just sort of thought they were activities. Some of them were fun. Some of them were annoying and wastes of time, things like that. But there was nothing particularly brutal or degrading about the hazing that I went through, thankfully. So I didn't really consider it to be hazing. It wasn't until afterwards, when I started to reflect back and think about it, that I realized, those things were hazing. When I learned more about the definitions of hazing and started to see some laws being passed, that I thought that I was hazed. And when my time came, I sort of did the same thing to the pledges that came after me, clean the house after the party, that kind of thing. So I felt like I was almost embarrassed of the fact that I had been hazed, and I didn't really want to admit it to myself or to anybody else. I kind of felt like, well, I'm a relatively bright guy. I'm pretty smart. I was too smart to be hazed. That couldn't have happened to me. So I kind of denied it to myself and to other people. Or maybe I was too strong I thought I was too strong-willed to be hazed. And that's kind of how I lied to myself and lied to others. Whenever people would ask, I would say, we really didn't have any hazing, that kind of thing. But there was definitely some, you can call it lowercase h hazing or versus capital H hazing, whatever, but it was still hazing regardless. And it was pretty pointless, reflecting back on it. So I told folks, eventually I came around to accepting that fact and revealing to people that I'd been hazed, especially when I was doing this research on hazing prevention. So that's kind of my hazing story.
Yeah, I think it's fairly common. I mean, a lot of the students out there, they don't consider themselves being hazed until maybe later on in life, and they start to reflect on it. They start looking at the laws, and they're like, "Oh, actually, that did happen to me,"
Right.
and they start to realize that. So, I find that to be pretty interesting because it happens to a lot of people. Certainly, I don't think it's just you. I think a lot of people don't consider themselves hazed, and when they learn more about it, then suddenly they're like, the light bulb goes off. So I think that is really, really interesting. And after all of that, you ended up getting your master's and your PhD in human sexuality education from Widener. And so I'm curious, what made you want to pursue these advanced degrees in human sexuality education?
Well, when I was getting my first master's at Virginia Commonwealth University in sociology, I was able to take a human sexuality course for the first time, and later on became the TA for the course. And it was at that point I realized that this was a subject that was kind of taboo to talk about, and I never heard anybody speak about human sexuality in a sincere but still fun way. Everybody always jokes about sexuality and makes a gag about it. But when I met Dr. Daphne Rankin, the professor who was the leader of that human sexuality class, I realized that this was a subject I could study for the rest of my life and really never get bored, because you can look at it through so many angles. You can look at it through a sociological lens, you can look at it through a psychological lens, you can look at human sexuality through a business lens even, and think of it as a transactional kind of thing. So it was really that realization that this was something that I was interested in and kind of fascinated by, that made me want to pursue it more, which led me to Widener for the PhD program.
Mhm. Well, it certainly sounds like you found your niche, and I certainly advocate if you are going to go on for a master's degree for a PhD, you better like it because
Right.
otherwise you're going to be absolutely miserable for a very long time.
Definitely.
So now you're an adjunct professor. I mean, you've done adjunct professor work at Temple, at William Patterson, at Widener, and at Montclair State. Talk to our audience a little bit about what is the best part of being an adjunct professor and working with college students every day.
Yeah, so I've been an adjunct for years now. In addition to the consulting work I do, being an adjunct has been great. Being able to work with students and again talk to them about human sexuality, a subject that isn't often taken very seriously in our culture, but to be able to offer them, for some folks, in a college class, the first time they've had sex ed in their lives, and for others, they may have had pretty poor sex education growing up in middle school and high school. So to be able to be one of the first people to give them accurate factual information in kind of a fun, amusing, but still pretty serious way, is one of the things that brings me a lot of joy about teaching. And just being able to be with the students and talk to them each and every week is something that I feel like kind of keeps me young, keeps me relevant.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think just being around students and speaking to them on stages across the country certainly keeps me young and it keeps me relevant. It keeps me knowing what the latest trends are. So I certainly
Right.
appreciate all of that stuff. So I think that's great. Now, you're also a hazing prevention specialist, and I know that you've been talking about some new research by Semino, of course, Aldo Semino out of Santa Barbara, and also
Mhm.
Thomas. And they published in the journal Evolution and Human Behavior that hazing does not lead to group solidarity. And I think this is a really interesting finding because the biggest reason why so many of the students who follow me on TikTok seem to haze, I think it kind of falls into maybe two buckets. Number one, that it promotes group solidarity. And then number two, I think there's a sense that it somehow promotes respect for the organization. But the other thing is that the military seems to be coming to the same conclusion as Semino and Thomas, that it
Mhm.
does not lead to group solidarity. So talk to our audience a little bit more about what did this new research by Semino and Thomas show?
Well, they studied 6 groups of pledges in the same fraternity over the course of a few years. And what they found was that despite what so many people think, there was no statistically significant evidence that group solidarity was improved, that cohesion was improved, or anything like that. There was some slight indicator that there was bonding between the pledge class members, but as far as cohesion with the larger fraternity itself, on their chapter, there was no evidence of that, and there was actually no evidence of any additional respect or positive association with their national fraternity either.
I'm so glad that they published that research. I think that is so critically important. And I need to make a TikTok about that research because it's critical. It's so critical. I've been arguing this point for literally for a decade, basically saying that, what's more important to you? Is it the pledge class unity or is it the chapter unity? Tell me what's more important to you. And, they always say that, that it brings people closer. And I'm like, all it does is create cliques in your organization. So the freshmen are only hanging out with the freshmen, the sophomores
Exactly.
are only hanging out with the sophomores, and so on. And it does nothing to build cohesion into your entire organization. So now you have 4, maybe 8 cliques in your chapter, and nobody's working together. How are we going to be an efficient organization if we have 4 or 8 cliques going on in the chapter? We can't.
Exactly, and that was my experience in the fraternity myself. Is the people who went through pledge classes together kind of stayed together, and we were all one fraternity, but there were definitely those cliques in the midst of everything.
Yeah, I'm definitely making a TikTok about this research by Simone Thomas. There's no question. I'm putting that on my to-do list for tomorrow. Now, recently, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, he signed HB 2322 into law. The bill is called Jack's Law, and it's named in honor of a former Arizona State University freshman, Jack Hugh Lolis. And he died in November 2012 from alcohol poisoning. He was a night of drinking as part of the hazing ritual to join SAE fraternity. He drowned at Tempe Town Lake after falling into the water, and his body was recovered 16 days later. So this new bill protects college and high school students against mental and physical abuse, also sexual humiliation, and other degrading acts that are typically behind these hazing rituals. And under the law, these individuals can also face charges for their role in the acts. So colleges are going to be required to disclose the law. Students have to sign acknowledgement in the handbooks before they join the organization. And I think we've been struggling with this problem of hazing for decades. So do
Mhm.
you think that the laws in the past have been too lenient? Or is it that the judges are just too lenient on their sentencing? Or is it both?
I think it's a combination of both. We're starting to see more laws on the state level being passed. I know Pennsylvania recently passed, where I'm at, Pennsylvania passed a state law in the past couple of years. And those laws, some people say, well, it doesn't prevent hazing, it just punishes hazing on the back end. It's really important for that legislation to exist as a deterrent for hazing practices. So I believe that the state laws are going to do a lot of good, and hopefully with the REACH Act that is being pushed at the federal level, that hazing will become a federal, that there will be a federally relevant hazing prevention law on the books as well. So I'm hoping that passes. If you're interested in that, you can just look up the REACH Act and read more about that. But as far as the judges are concerned, I think so many people look at hazing as just, kids being kids or boys being boys in the case of fraternity men or male athletes, that kind of thing. And they just dismiss it out of hand as being a playful activity that really isn't as bad as it seems. But hopefully, as these laws are passed, more people will get on board with the idea that these are really harmful practices. And I do want to say I'm really glad that the part of that Arizona law about sexual humiliation was included, because my research found that sexual humiliation and sexual hazing was a big part of a lot of fraternity initiations as well.
Really? So talk to us a little bit more about your study on sexual hazing, because it really was the first one to examine the meanings of these behaviors among fraternity men. So what is the meaning behind that kind of behavior in fraternities?
Well, I interviewed 30 fraternity men from across the country. I think they were in 17 different states. The main thing that they said was that sexual hazing was about dominance, establishing dominance, which makes sense in the context of hazing overall. A lot of it is about establishing that hierarchy of power, one group to the next as the incoming group comes in. And as far as the meaning of sexual hazing was concerned, they were really, really well spoken about this. I was really impressed by some of the language that they used. They spoke about masculinity and the context of toxic masculinity being a big factor in sexual hazing. They talked about also the fact that some of the hazing was kind of fun or funny, and that kind of goes back to some research that's been done on hazing as a form of play, which makes me think that if we want to prevent hazing, we need to provide, particularly sexual hazing or hazing in general, we need to provide fun, alternative, engaging activities for these young men and women to engage in. So that they can have some alternative to hazing that exists that is actually team building, that does build cohesion. One of the things, going back to the Semino article, is that one of the things that he found also was that activities like parties and things like that were considered fun did lead to more cohesion. So if we can somehow replace some of these damaging hazing behaviors with other fun, engaging activities, then we're going to do a lot to eliminate hazing for sure.
See, that's exactly been my strategy for decades. It's unbelievable. I can't wait to really dive into that article, because I've been saying it for decades. We just need to substitute hazing behavior with other activities that are not considered hazing and something that we can have fun doing. And if we can make that switch, then we're in. And, so even just, something as simple as, going to walk the dogs at the local dog shelter. I mean, every dog shelter in America, needs more hands, more people to help out, more people to help just take the dogs for a walk. We don't even have enough people to do that. And if we, as this pledge class, can get together and basically go and do that for the shelter, we're doing a good service for our community. And you know what? It's a heck of a lot of fun. I have to tell you, you're going to have a blast doing it.
That's a great idea, and I agree. One of the things that we need to do also is focus on getting administrators to provide support for these alternative behaviors. It's one thing to say, yes, we support this and we want to end hazing. It's another thing to actually provide funding, provide resources to the fraternities and sororities so that they can actually implement some of these things.
You totally nailed it. And that's another thing that I've been talking about forever, is that we need to be educating on hazing prevention every 6 months, because that's how often we have new members that are coming into our organization. So if we haven't spoken to them every 6 months, then we've never spoken to them about hazing prevention. And so we must be investing in education around these topics every 6 months. If we don't, that's when we end up getting into trouble, because somebody ends up coming from high school into our college fraternities, and typically they are bringing hazing activity that they experienced in high school and bringing it to college. I mean, I literally had to do a membership review of a chapter, and that is exactly what was going on, that they basically picked up hazing behavior in their church retreat and they brought it into the fraternity.
Exactly.
From high school.
That goes to that goes to the fact that hazing prevention needs to happen a lot earlier. It needs to happen in high school and middle school. Parents need to be involved. Parents need to be educated about hazing. Coaches need to be educated about hazing. Church leaders need to be educated about hazing, evidently. So we need to start early and often, like you said.
So that brings up another really good point is we do hear stories of really brutal sexual hazing that, very often seems to involve high school students. Could be the football team, things like that.
Mhm.
And in addition to the hazing, the offense often includes attempts by lawyers, coaches, parents, community members. They're trying to explain the hazing as, well, it's just horseplay with the boys. It's boys being
Mhm.
boys, as you said before. And it really says to me that we tolerate these kinds of hurtful actions and that we lower expectations of behavior in high school students or within student athletes. And then once they get to the college arena, right? So they graduate from high school, now they're in college. Now all of a sudden I'm labeled as soft because I don't want students getting killed or our
Right.
fraternity brothers going to jail. And so I guess my question to you is, how do we keep high expectations of behavior within fraternities and sororities, despite all of the hazing they're exposed to in high school, despite the satire content that is on websites and pop culture movies, and the increase in pro-hazing attitudes that we've seen over the last 2 years of the pandemic? How in the world are we going to keep high expectations of behavior?
Well, one of the things that was interesting about my study was that out of the 30 people, I had 9 participants who experienced absolutely no hazing at all. So I asked them what was different about their chapters. And one of the things they said was strong leadership at the officer level, the president and other administrative levels. And I couldn't agree more with that. I think we need to specifically train officers in our fraternities and sororities to actively speak out against hazing, to let them know that as officers, it's really on them to make sure that there's no hazing taking place, and to really put forth this attitude of hazing is just simply unacceptable. Another finding was that having an active and involved fraternity advisor was really important. So I know that in a lot of cases, the fraternity, the university advisor to the fraternity is just sort of somebody who signs a paper every year or something like that. It isn't really involved. But having an active chapter advisor who is also anti-hazing, is also really a strong leadership figure, is something that help those fraternities to stay hazing free.
Yeah, I think you're really onto something there. I think, the strongest fraternity chapters that I work with typically have two things. Number one, strong leadership, like you said at the top. I know that if I have a strong leader as my chapter president, then I'm going to have a lot less issues with that particular chapter. And that comes from
Exactly.
experience of working with 120 chapters around the country, in the fraternity that I was working for, the fraternity headquarters. And so that's number one. And number two, if you want to know what a successful chapter looks like, typically they have great alumni advisors that are very hands-on, that are meeting with the chapter on a weekly basis, that are meeting with the exec board on a weekly basis to help keep them in line. Because I think ultimately, if there is no alumni advisors, we don't have strong leadership with the alumni, at a certain point, that train is going to come off the track. And there's going to
Exactly.
be nobody to push them back onto the track to say, you know what, you've wandered off into the weeds. You're now off the track. You need to get back on. And without that adult supervision, without those alumni advisors to help guide them, I just think it's a matter of time. And at some point, they're going to fall off the track.
Right. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Oh man, this has been really, really good. It confirms a lot of the things that I've been talking about for, literally a decade. But I'm so glad to see your research. I'm so glad to see the new research that came out with Aldo Simino and with Thomas. I'm definitely going to go and take a look at that article from Evolution in Human Behavior. And so this has been really enlightening for me, and certainly really good for our listeners. So I appreciate everything that you do. I really, really do. Now, I know that you're
No,
over
thank
in
you.
Philadelphia, and I actually just came back from a fraternity convention. I spoke at the Alpha Delta Phi fraternity convention, which was in Philadelphia, and I had a blast. It was so much fun. But I need to know, the next time that I get back to Philly, where should I be going for a great bite to eat? Because we like good food here.
Well, I'm a vegetarian, so I'm going to give you a good vegetarian recommendation.
All
I
right,
think
that's
that
good.
Philly I think Philly's probably one of the best cities to be a vegetarian in. We're vegan. There are so many restaurants that are just incredible here. So I'm going to tell you to go to Hip City Veg for vegan fast food. It's a great place to get a quick bite. They have a great fake chicken sandwich, sweet potato wedges, things like that, fake chicken nuggets, anything you want. And it's all absolutely delicious. So I really I hope you get a chance to go there next time you're in town.
I'm definitely going to have to go and check it out. My daughter is going to appreciate it because my daughter is a vegetarian. So she certainly appreciates that recommendation, which is great. I'm still trying to get into Zahav. I'm Israeli. So for me, I'm trying to get into Zahav in Philadelphia that serves all kinds of Middle Eastern food. And I just can't get a reservation. so there's that problem. But there is great food in Philadelphia. And it's much more than just Philly cheesesteaks, I promise.
Yes, definitely.
Well, this has been great. This has been a lot of fun. So if our listeners, if they want to connect with you about some of your work, whether it be for hazing prevention, whether it be health and sexuality educator, whatever it is, I mean, where should they go to connect with you and get more information?
The place to find all of my information is ryanmckeephd.com. It's got my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my Instagram, and my I think that's it actually, and my email. So yeah, so if you wanna contact me on any of the socials or via email, ryanmckeephd.com.
I love it. That's fantastic. RyanMckeePhD.com. Please go and check out Ryan's work. I know he's an up and comer and we're passionate about the same thing. So it's always good to meet other folks in the industry that are just as passionate about these topics as you are. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. Please keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing the research. Send me over whatever new research you come across and you find that's going to be interesting, because I just love to get it out to the masses. I just think it's brilliant. So keep doing the work that you're doing. It's important, I think, for, not only for our fraternities, but every fraternity out there, that we continue doing that work to make sure that, number one, our members are safe. That's the most important thing. And that number two, that more fraternity and sorority members get the same opportunities that we had, that it remains relevant for the next 100 years. So those are the two things that I'm focused on. So I appreciate what you do.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me. And thanks for all you do as well.
You got it. All right. So if you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Mckee, please make sure that you like it. Make sure that you share it on social media with other college students that are also passionate about all of these issues. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we're going to see you next time.